So as I was finishing up the carbon cycle notes, I realized that I neglected to tell you one extremely important fact about the carbon cycle. I want to make sure that we write this down so that we don't forget. The ocean is the largest carbon sink, meaning it absorbs the most amount of carbon. Not trees, the ocean. All right, so now we can move on to the nitrogen cycle. All right, so I'm just going to be honest with you guys. The nitrogen cycle is the most difficult one to understand. And there's a lot of new words, a lot of new vocabulary terms that accompany learning about the nitrogen cycle. So, the nitrogen cycle is going to be a little bit different because nitrogen is basically used really, really fast. We don't have a lot of old nitrogen storage on the planet because it's used by something as soon as it's available. So, nitrogen is stored for short periods of time. Short periods of time. All right. Now, so the question that you're going to get asked frequently is, what is the largest reservoir of carbon, I'm sorry, not of carbon, of nitrogen on the planet? Where is most nitrogen found on Earth? And it's actually going to be in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is a major reservoir. Our atmosphere, guys, is roughly 70% nitrogen. It's not mostly oxygen, as you would assume. Our atmosphere is made mostly of nitrogen. Okay? Now, nitrogen is what we call a limiting nutrient. So nitrogen is a limiting nutrient. And what this means is it is incredibly important for plant growth. And if nitrogen is not available for plant growth, they simply will not grow. So if it's not there, they're going to die. That's why it's called a limiting nutrient. So this is going to be needed, left a D off there, needed for plant growth. Okay, so let's dive into the nitrogen cycle, and what I want to do is zoom in here because I want you guys to see these words up close. All right, so we know that the largest amount of nitrogen is in the atmosphere. So here's the question. How do we get nitrogen in the atmosphere into the ground so that plants can use it? Well, there's two ways that we can get nitrogen into the soil, and that is called nitrogen fixation. So here's the term right here, nitrogen fixation. There are two ways to do this. Okay, the first one is the biological way. So in the biological way, we're actually using a plant because it's alive, so it's biological. Okay, so this is what happens. If you look at the roots on this plant, there's these little bumps, and these little bumps are called nodules. Nodules. That is supposed to be a deal. Okay, nodules. N-O-D-U-L-E-S. Sorry, it's rough right there. All right. So these nodules contain bacteria. So anytime you see this circle right here, you can see them all throughout the cycle. This is bacteria. Bacteria is what basically forces the nitrogen cycle to occur. If bacteria were gone, none of this would be happening. So these nodules, these little bumps on the roots, contain bacteria. Okay? So, the nodules contain bacteria. And what these nodules do is they convert nitrogen to something called ammonia. So the nodules contain bacteria, which converts nitrogen, so it's N2, nitrogen, to ammonia. And ammonia is NH4. You guys need to know this. NH4 is ammonia. All right? So nitrogen gets converted into ammonia. And I'll talk about why this is important in just a second. But I want to look at the second way that we can fix nitrogen first. So this is the first way, nitrogen fixation. The second way, you are going to see that my drawing skills are pretty awful. You're like, what is she doing? Yep, this is pretty awful. This is lightning. So lightning is the second way that we can fix nitrogen, and this is the geochemical fixation. So geochemical, okay? So you have biological with plants, and then you have geochemical with lightning, all right? So let's go back over here to ammonia. So with ammonia, okay, what is this going to be used for? Why is this so important? Okay, so ammonia is a really important component for proper plant growth. Okay, so what's going to happen here is you also have bacteria in the soil. Okay, so decomposers. And bacteria is a decomposer, just like fungus. So these are things that are going to break down dead material. So decomposers also break down dead matter into ammonia. Remember, this is NH4. Okay? So, you have ammonia coming from biological fixation, and you have ammonia coming from decomposition. And so this is called ammonification. Ammonification is the production of ammonia. That's what it's called for, okay? It's the production of ammonia. All right, so you also have ammonification right here through, guess what this is? Fungus. This is a mushroom. So you also have NH4 being produced right here as well. Okay. Now, this ammonia is going to be taken up by plants. So here you see the word assimilation. Okay, assimilation means that producers take up nitrogen from the soil. Okay, so the plants absorb it into their tissue, and then the animals eat this. So remember, this is consumption. And what do animals use nitrogen for? Well, remember the chomp? Animals use that nitrogen to make proteins and nucleic acids like DNA. Okay? So, let's go back a little bit and review this before we move on. So, nitrogen is taken out of the air through the nodules on plants. The bacteria fix it into ammonia. Decomposers like bacteria and fungus in the soil also will break down or convert nitrogen into ammonia. That ammonia is then absorbed in assimilation into plants, into their tissue, and then consumers, like this little chipmunk or squirrel here, will eat it to produce proteins and DNA. Okay, now here's the issue, is that some plants cannot uptake ammonia, so it has to be converted into something else. So in nitrification, look, here we have more bacteria, okay? Some plants can't use NH4. Remember, NH4 is ammonia. Some plants can't use ammonia. So these bacteria right here, these bacteria break ammonia down into something called nitrates. Okay? So some plants have to use nitrate. They cannot use ammonia. So that is what nitrification is. Okay? Nitrification is breaking it down into nitrates for other plants to use because they can't use ammonia. All right. Now, here is the last step. So we have denitrification. So the problem is, how do we get this nitrogen that's in the soil back into the atmosphere? Because plants aren't going to use 100% of it. That nitrogen has to be returned back into the air so this process can happen again. So guess what we have here? You guessed it, more bacteria. So these bacteria convert nitrates, which we just learned about right here. They convert nitrates back into what we call atmospheric nitrogen. Okay? So from here, the nitrogen goes back into the air, and then it's going to go back into this system through fixation, whether it is biological or geochemical with the lightning. Okay? So just to reiterate what's happening here, nitrogen has to be fixed into the soil, either through biological or geochemical fixation. All right, so the nitrogen is converted into ammonia, and that's called ammonification. All right, ammonification, you also have decomposers that break down dead matter into ammonia. So there's your bacteria and your fungus. The plants take up the ammonia through a process called assimilation, and then through consumption, consumers eat it to produce proteins and DNA. Other plants that can't use ammonia use bacteria to break down ammonia into nitrates. Okay? And then from that point, another set of bacteria convert the nitrates into atmospheric nitrogen, and it goes back into the atmosphere. All right, so let's look at some human impacts really quickly on the nitrogen cycle. Okay, there are 3. So we're going to see an increase in atmospheric nitrogen causes acid rain. We're going to talk about acid rain later on. The second is loss of biodiversity. If plants don't have nitrogen, then they are going to die. Diversity, y'all. Sorry. And then the third, which we're going to talk about in our next section of notes, is a process called eutrophication. Eutrophication. All right, so this is the nitrogen cycle. We're going to talk about the phosphorus cycle next.